But all that being said, today I wanted to talk about what's going on with, trans people and stuff. I was talking to a relative that we're trying to connect with that seems to respect our transness. And I just mentioned this as an anecdote because uh, we were talking about like just how we've been doing and how things are, rough. And just in a brief conversation, just mentioning, yeah, it really sucks. There's like, you know, our country is engaged in an ongoing genocide, and it sucks. And she's like, "Oh, you're so well informed," and it did remind us of being a kid and being told like, we're knowledgeable for our age. Though honestly, compared to the average person, I think we are more knowledgeable, but we also like stay around other we keep company with people who care about what's happening as well. So sometimes, apropos of nothing or apropos of something, one of us, like in a group call or hanging out or whatever, will be like, "Oh, did you hear about this?" Or "Did you hear about this?" Like our partner literally checks like wastewater levels wastewater levels. The wastewater records, like for covert numbers, like people organize them and stuff like that, like in PDF form. That's also a thing we could do if we wanted to, like show off those numbers and stuff. Because I think that there's a lot of stuff that kind of just passes over you because there's just so much information. So there's ways to find things out about what's going on and to have a more tangible understanding of it instead of just getting flooded with, well, everything and then just shutting down. And we definitely don't want to shut people down, or cause people to shut down. But I feel like we've not been doing our due diligence that we usually do when talking about stuff like that. And when we were talking to this relative, we were basically doing like kind of just a field test for where they were politically because we don't know where they are politically anymore. Uh, I mean, when we were growing up, they would have well, we didn't really have the word communist to apply to people in our everyday life, so it would have been liberal, left positive. In that case, this relative was definitely less conservative feeling or traditional than like our parents because they were also an artist, or is also an artist. They're not dead, and I don't know what they do anymore, but um, it's interesting to think about that they probably thought I was talking about Palestine, and there are several ongoing genocides right now. The Palestinian genocide, genocide going on in the Congo, and there's also, the war in Ukraine. Um, but I was actually talking about the trans genocide. Because before, like years ago, especially during Biden's time, it was very easy for people to kind of just shake off what was happening and just go, "Oh, it was bad, but it's not as bad anymore." You know, like and it's like no, there's like all these like anti-trans bills happening all the time. Positive news about trans laws is usually not a protection, but that some evil, super fucked up law or bill did not pass or got blocked by a judge. And usually, Aaron in the morning is something that we like glance to ourselves. It's like kind of our equivalent of like when newspapers were like were like actual papers. I know newspapers still exist, but like, does anyone read an actual physical newspaper? Chat, do you read a physical newspaper? Um, like the news that we consume always has some amount of this website and this journalist. If you don't know Aaron in the morning, you should really familiarize yourselves because if you want to find out anything that's happening, especially that is not being covered or not being covered from a not supporting or lukewarm on the rights of trans people, like journalistic content. Like if you want to find out what's happening to trans people and it's not gonna be like the New York Times or something, um like Erin in the morning is very important. She's doing like amazing work. It has been doing so for several years. Um, and we're part of like the mailing list. So we saw this like as we were saying up for stream, and so it was just like, why not talk about it, right? I mean, people are still ignoring what's happening to trans people. I won't say that they're not, and they're trying to, you know, well, honestly, the Democratic Party is also fascist. So I mean, it kind of sucks all around, especially considering after the election, they're like, after not really standing up for trans people at all, going, "Oh, we stand up for trans people too hard, and it made us lose the election." It's like, you really got the wrong thing from what happened. Wow, you were so thirsty to scapegoat us immediately, and it's the pendulum is swinging in the direction against what it was years ago when, especially, a lot of people were complaining that trans inclusivity was just like, or visibility rather, was just like too high, and all this stuff back before like the fervor was so intense. But now there's a familiarity with it, and it's been normalized, and it sucks. And it intensifies the ostracization in society, not just the like anti-trans laws themselves, the blocking of hormones, not allowing people to participate in sports, even like students, like kids growing up, to participate in their own sports teams, not even necessarily in a competitive like we're trying to be the champion sort of thing. Like, people just like sports and doing sports also. It doesn't always have to be all about I guess the competition aspect is there, but my point is that, like, in the pursuit, the transphobia in pursuit of barring trans people from sports, also kind of just turns sports into a shell of its own, like, importance. And I'm not even a sports person, mind you. If like all the national sports teams with the NFL and the NBA, if they all like, just disappeared, if those things weren't a thing anymore, if those stadiums weren't used for that anymore, I would pretty much shrug. Honestly. However, I do think in a lot of ways, actually, I think it's a right wing thing. Anything that the right wing touches that, like, they want to use as a way to, like, say this is an example of something that is good, and the degenerates are doing something that is opposite of this and that is bad, always seems to be something that when you look at it outside of the perspective of this, like, traditionalist, not even just traditionalist, this, like, oligarchist mindset, that it's just like they really just corrupted in like the worst way and make it sort of empty. I mean, I guess that's what fascism does, but it's really funny. Like, I know that like a lot of Christianity is used for prejudice as vilification or reasoning for prejudice against like queer people in general. But like, I'm not even a Christian. It's like, I know that Christianity isn't necessarily like homophobic or queerphobic. However, it's just the first example of something that people use to cudgel queer people. I mean, they grab onto everything, but it's interesting because I'm not a stan for sports, and I just realized just now, it's like, oh yeah, they're kind of belittling the importance of sports and what sports is for by making it so gender essentialist. I mean, to the point of what's happening in the Olympics, and like tests for like testosterone levels, and the scrutiny especially for like women of color at the Olympic level. um it's not just queerphobia and transphobia, it's also racism, it's also xenophobia. And of course, these are all the easily recognizable words that if you're in the same circles that we're in, you understand what I'm talking about, at least at a glance, and you're just like, okay, I understand that, understand that, understand that. Wow, Mad Libs. well, it's not Mad Libs. It's but sometimes it feels like when you use too much jargon that it like feels more artificial to talk about. However, this was important enough for us to talk about because just the concept of segregation, like codified sex based discrimination or sex based segregation, is actually really scary to me generally. And I know a lot of trans people, especially trans femmes, that despite the fact that like there's like large swaths of people who will say that they're allies, or I think especially for like this is especially pertinent. We've noticed in like sapphic community that because of all the rhetoric about how like uh sets sets single set spaces need to be single set spaces, and like you know gender and sets are the same thing, and you know all the ick that that is flattening of bodies and experiences. And I feel like there's a lot of people who, even when they see a community that is like, oh, we're trans inclusive, like trans inclusive lesbians, for example, the Reddit community, like actual lesbians, is very trans inclusive, but it's still this itch, and it's just like it's really scary because you also have to make yourself vulnerable being in that position, especially if it's not like centered or run or kind of organized by like trans people. It's hard to know, especially because I've been seeing like more fucking gold star rhetoric coming out. I mean, it's probably because of the separate the LGBT and T stuff that's been going around. Wow, I'm just on a tirade today. Fuck. Haven't touched a newspaper in years. Same. The line between liberalism and fascism is like non-existent to me. I guess liberals export their oppression to like colonies and people outside of the state, but that doesn't even apply to the U.S. or Greenland or Australia or like the entirety of South America. I don't even know. Oh, so what you're saying is, liberal to you, liberalism is fascism. Uh, like the saying of, if you scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds. I get what you're saying. Okay, so all that preamble, what's happening? Alabama passes anti-trans law that could formally greenlight sex-based segregation. Throughout U.S. history, the distinction between legal sets versus illegal set segregation has often been arbitrary and capricious. I was also worried about this because, like, it's getting harder and harder to exist outside, and I'm also really scared about like the escalation of stuff like this and like how people are allowed to like present in public. And I'm curious about what other spaces might be set segregated, and yeah. Was a woman. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed a bill on February 18th trying to codify just that. Sponsored by Republican State Senate April Weaver and Republican Susan Du Bois, the policy takes its name from a conservative film of the same title, which self-identifies as a documentary. It is also known as Senate Bill 79. They've actually named it that? Ugh, gross. If you don't know about Matt Walsh's movie Was a Woman, I feel so happy for you. Legal scholars warn that SB 79 discriminates against trans people and intersex people. The law erroneously states that there are only two sexes, that the term sex is objective and fits, and those with intersex conditions are not another sex. It enforces strict definitions of sex, as well as gendered words such as man, woman, mother, and father. These clauses strip trans, intersex, and gender nonconforming people from certain legal protections from discrimination. It can also pave the way to restricting parental rights for queer and same sex couples with kids. Oh, can't wait for that. They have been doing a lot of that. They've been illegally detransitioning people based on certain states. I've heard that some people who have gotten their gender marker changed have had their passports like confiscated from them when they've gone to like a border office, or they've been like, you know, getting on a plane to go to a different country, or like the immigration like little station or whatever, and it's just like, sorry, not immigration, just like for travel, because you need a passport to travel to different countries, you know. And it's just like, oh yeah, you don't have, like, we don't recognize this anymore, and we're taking it from you. And you know, people have been, you know, trying to navigate having a correct passport, especially for people who want to flee the country soon, or at all, or have that option. And I know that that's been a big thing. Like, the legal place that people can be is kind of diminishing. We were actually very paranoid about this very thing happening. And when we got our name legally changed, we never got our gender marker changed, because we were just like, you know what? If they start putting us in camps, I think I want to have. I think I'll try to have plausible deniability. I don't know how much I can actually have. We're like super gay from like 5 miles away. You can see us. It's like we just have a like an, well, it's not always an aggro filter, but it's definitely an intention filter. I hate dressing indiscriminately, boringly. I mean, sometimes grayscale is fine. Yeah, I'm at TSA. I am unfortunately aware of the Matt Walsh movies. I've seen a lot of videos dissecting them and stuff, and I am pretty sure it was like for at one point like put on everyone's homepage on Twitter, because Elon pushed it to everyone like as a tweet. It was kind of fucked up. The law functionally legislates entire groups of people out of legal existence. Dory Miles, a licensed attorney and board member of the advocacy group Equity Alabama, eviscerated the bill, which she describes as both bad legal practice and bad science. With incorrect science and misinformation about biology, SB 79 seeks to establish the law in Alabama in a way that makes it impossible for people who do not fit into either definition of gender to legally manifest their gender identity. Miles was not the only critic to point out the bill's biological shortcomings. The bill requires the state to define man or woman based on whether you can produce sperm or ovulate, or whether you could, or whether you might, or whether you hypothetically could, writes Brian Lyman, editor of the Alabama Reflector. The necessary medical tests to ascertain as much at birth are rare. Gender assignments do not legally have to be performed by nor verified by a medical professional before filing for a birth certificate. More notable, however, may be the fact that SB 79 explicitly prohibits the state from restricting government-run separate single-set spaces or environments for males and females where biology, privacy, safety, or fairness are implicated, which could, in theory, greenlight sex-based segregation. See the following excerpt from the bill. Discrimination on the basis of sex thereby forbids fair treatment of females or males. Neither the state nor any political subdivision of the state shall be prohibited from establishing separate single-set spaces or environments for males and females when biology, privacy, safety, or fairness are implicated. Literally, it says that. The terms privacy, safety, or fairness are not defined, although such sex-segregated spaces already exist in practice, such as men and women's prisons. The law is written in a way that could give the government a broad brush which to paint gendered lines, and throughout U.S. history, the distinctions between legal versus illegal sex segregation has often been arbitrary and capricious. I'm thinking of, so people are generally worried about anti-drag laws being used to, and this is a different topic technically, obviously under the same umbrella of fucked up shit, but anti-drag laws being used against trans people to enforce dressing a certain way, based on what's in your pants, or presumably in your pants, or whatever. And they weren't called like drag laws, but like in the 20s and the 30s and stuff, or like back when queerphobia was so much more roaring, in a way where it wasn't from an upswing, it was just a continuous beating down of us through history. Maybe I'm projecting. There have been like obscenity laws that basically have done the same thing that people have been worried about, and that's what people have pointed to historically as the reasoning for why they're worried. When people, especially liberal ass people, say, "Oh, why are you so worried? Like, it's an anti-drag law, not an anti-trans law." Or not an anti dressing like a different gender law. You're overreacting. And it's like, this has happened before. And it's also like when things are super vague, loopholes and stuff like that. And it makes enforcement be able to be really aggressive, because it's not easily defined, and you don't have a way to even like legally fight it if it's happening to you, even though you realize it's not fair. Of course, at that point you might try to like contact the ACLU and try to like do a lawsuit, but if the law already says that they can do it, then that process basically doesn't really work anymore, you know? In this vicious desire to harm a small group of people, we're allowing governments to separate men and women on the slightest pretense, Lyman writes. Ivey and the Alabama legislature have opened the door to sex segregation. Kansas, Tennessee, Florida, and Montana have also seen similar bills that attempt to legislate the definition of sex. Earlier this week, Montana's iteration was struck down by the courts, which called it intellectually and morally indefensible. In Alabama's case, the bill was rushed through the legislature with near unprecedented speed. The presence of these efforts across state lines is no coincidence. Many of them contained whole swaths taken verbatim, or near verbatim, from the anti-trans activists at the Independent Women's Voice, called the Women's Bill of Rights. The legal framework it proposes, in the form of ready-to-sign sample legislation for politicians, seeks to codify binary, immutable legal standards of sex in the name of women's rights. Proponents argue it mitigates sexual violence. There is no evidence to suggest trans inclusion and acceptance leads to an increase in sexual assault cases. IWV also claims that sex segregation ensures conditions that are separate but not inherently equal. This framing, especially during Black History Month, is sort of why I'm extra activated with a cherry on top. Cause like, this is the type of shit that we were, like, we grew up being told about, like, segregation and stuff like that. And the more spaces are segregated by a binary and flat view of sex and gender, when you deviate from those things, that also increases the aggro on you, so to speak. It increases the chance of you being hate crimed, unless you conform, right? And that's what they're trying to do. Like, even without a like anti or like an obscenity law or an anti-drag law, like forcing trans people to like out themselves, essentially, like, is going to cause a lot of, well, increased violence, as it already has. The group and its sister organization maintain tight ties to far-right initiatives such as the Heritage Foundation. The former advised the latter in creating Project 2025. You know, the Bible of evil. The playbook for the Trump administration's crusade against the toxic normalization of transgenderism. These states follow the Trump administration's attempts to erase trans people under the eyes of the law. White House officials argue that there is only one scientific definition of sex, which is differentially determined at conception or possibly at birth, depending on who you ask. Anti-trans headers placed on websites judge ordered Trump to restore. The headers were placed on major websites at the CDC, FDA, and HHS. This is from the 18th, actually. And it's pretty short. But I have been hearing that, I mentioned the taking the T out of, LGBT. That's been happening on, government websites. I don't know if you've heard. That Trump has been ordering for websites and government things to change their inclusivity or anything that has to do with DEI, diversity, inclusivity, and anything with minorities. Basically, there's it's been a mess. It's even happened at Stonewall, not mentioning trans people at Stonewall, which is fucking insane. So a lot of sites have pulled that out. Also, not even just T, it's the TQ plus. It's weird. It's not weird when you think about it, but it's fucked up. I think that said, I consider a repeat of Jim Crow is preferable to a repeat of 1930s Germany for trans oppression. Both should be inconceivable. It's been a concerted effort for a really long time. I believe Russia just codified some major anti-trans or anti-queer law recently, and the American government is the head of our American government is very buddy with the head of the Russian government, and they seem to want a lot of the same things. So I guess based on how history has been, I know there's definitely a lot of people who are say Holocaust survivors or very genocide. Genocide is relevant to them in their personal lives and their personal histories, and they're this is fucked up, how can this keep happening? And then people are people in power, especially journalists and politicians, have been it's not as bad as you say. And it's ugh. Honestly, straight up denying it is fucked up in and of itself, that bad things are happening. But the lukewarmism, the you're just overreacting, the gaslighting, it's just so Would you listen to pirate radio? Who wouldn't? That can mean a lot of things. I don't know what you mean specifically. I generally feel my only realistic hope is only losing my rights and not being thrown into a camp. I would prefer to not be thrown into a camp, but they're probably gonna try to do that too. They're already throwing the camps are just gonna be prisons. Guantanamo Bay is taking a lot of new jobs and opening up new space, even though it should be closed down for human rights abuses. Let me finish this article. This is part of the reason that we don't often directly talk about political stuff during our streams, specifically planned for it, because there's just so much stuff and there's so much information, there's so much we just kind of pick up that we can go in a million different directions on a million different tangents and just, you know, time blindness. After a federal judge ruled that the Food and Drug Administration, the Center for Disease Control, and the Health and Human Services departments must reinstate web pages containing vital information about trans people and other marginalized groups, the Trump administration capitulated. However, officials added a highly misleading disclaimer to them. Any information on this page promoting gender ideology is extremely inaccurate and disconnected from the immutable biological reality that there are two sexes, male and female. The message reads, contradicting global medical standards of defining gender and sex. The Trump administration rejects gender ideology and condemns and harms it causes to children by promoting chemical and surgical mutilation, and to women by depriving them of their dignity, safety, well-being, and opportunities. This page does not reflect biological reality, and therefore the administration and this department reject it. See the statement that appears on the top of the CDC website on the LGBTQ plus health disparities here. Yeah, or like, we have to put, the court order made us have to put this back, but we'll say that it's not real. Wow. That's such a, that's such saltiness. God. They do have, in Project 2025, they literally have a, like a, if it was a video, if this all was a video game, it would be like a strategy guide. They built a strategy guide for, well, their fascist, legal genocide of trans people. Yeah. The Day of Purge saga began on January 20th, the day of President Trump's inauguration, with an executive order attacking trans rights and restricting the official agency business documents and communication that even acknowledged trans people's existence. It was coupled with a barrage of policies targeting any federal program to restore or source relating to topics deemed seditious by the White House, such as race, reproductive rights, and the word equality. Totally cool and normal. Then, on January 29th, the Office of Personnel Management issued an order censoring materials that include or promote gender ideology. Using a dragnet approach, public health agencies scrambled to comply, causing what the courts have deemed irreparable harm. The dragnet approach. Oh my god, Instagram. I don't... can I even hear this?
All mention of transgender
Whoa.
people from Stonewall National Monument at Trump's direction. And whenever I mean all mention, I mean every single mention. On the webpage, they literally changed LGBTQ to LGB on the main website, removing trans people from any role in Stonewall. On the subpages, they've used what can best be described as a control plus find and replace feature to simply remove the word transgender from every subpage. This has led to some ridiculous and grammatically incorrect pages, such as the page on trans woman Sylvia Rivera, who had a huge role in the Stonewall movement. The National Park Service page from Stonewall now says Sylvia Rivera began fighting for gay and rights. No, literally, they removed transgender and now it literally just says gay and rights instead of gay and transgender rights. This is abhorrent. They're erasing trans people from history in front of our eyes, even the very history that we played a huge role in making. You can't spell Stonewall without the T. Transgender people were there. We're still here, and we're not going anywhere.
I'm not sure how it relates to Dragnet necessarily, but I mean, wait. I mean, that's important. It was referring to the thing that I was just talking about. Dragnet is an American media franchise created by actor and producer Jack Webb and owned by his company. Dragnet is perhaps the most famous and influential police procedural crime drama in American media history. Webb aims in Dragnet were for unpretentious acting and unrealistic depiction of policing. The series portrayed police work as dangerous and heroic and helped shape public perception of law enforcement in the 20th century. Okay, so it's like revisionist. Dragnet is revisionist. The it's revisionism, and that's why it's a Dragnet approach. Got it. Look, we can find things out and understand. Thank you, Henry, for providing some amount of context. But you know, I'm a smart cookie. I can look things up too. Causing what the courts have deemed irreparable harm. The Trump administration was forced to reinstate many of the deleted web pages. When they did, they added an unprecedented and outright false pop-up along with it. This new sidebar on federal websites peddles multiple categorical false claims about gender. There is no absolute scientific and universal definition of sex, which may often be assigned male or female at birth based on a doctor's split-second analysis of an infant's external genitals. This brief assessment does not determine or take into account an infant's chromosomal makeup nor internal reproductive organs, nor does it predict the amount of sex hormones they will produce as they age, which is what drives the development of secondary sex traits such as breast tissue or an Adam's apple. It's also misleadingly claims that gender ideology is something that harms children in a way that incorrectly equates transness with so-called gender ideology. Extremist notions of gender championed by the religious right do in fact cause lasting physical and emotional harm to young people. Acceptance of trans, intersex, and gender nonconforming people is linked to a decrease in suicidality and other mental health problems. The White House's attack on gender ideology is the most recent iteration of a decades-old playbook used to target gender and sexual minorities. It's a fan-favorite phrase among anti-trans radicals who have warped biological history and science in an attempt to enforce extremist political views of gender into the general public in spite of legal and medical framework that would, in theory, hinder this. Well, I'm talking a lot. Oh, that was the other reason, because when we were reading a bunch of studies and reading a lot of articles like this, it was just like a lot of talking, and you know, it tires our voice. I mean, we read visual novels sometimes too, but we try to break it up. But we've been known to go for like 4 hours at a time, sometimes longer. Like, you know, doing a lot of like more like technical, or at the very least like a lot more hard reading as opposed to soft reading on stream. So sometimes that can be a lot. We'll still make it clear something was here if we need to remove it. So everyone knows this is censorship. Even though it's the government fighting the government, I'm glad that there's some people pushing back against like all these unjust laws. I mean, it's like we're still bleeding. Like we're like, as a community, we're still like, we've been stabbed and we're bleeding, and then there's some people who have like cotton swabs and they're like dabbing it as much as they can, and like one person has a spray, and when the fucking stabbing person isn't looking, they spray it with like some fucking alcohol, but then they hear the spray and then they turn around and they push in a little deeper. It's just Christ. It's also misleadingly claims gender ideology is something that harms children in a way that incorrectly equates transness with so-called gender ideology. Extremist notions of gender championed by the religious right do in fact cause lasting physical and emotional harm to young people. Acceptance of trans, intersex, and gender nonconforming people is linked to a decrease in suicidality and other mental health problems. The White House's attack on gender ideology is the most recent iteration of a decades-old playbook used to target gender and sexual minorities. It's a fan-favorite phrase along anti-trans radicals, who have warped biology, history, and science in an attempt to enforce extremist political views of gender into the general public in spite of the legal and medical framework that would, in theory, hinder this. Human Rights Watch has dubbed the concept of gender ideology something of a Hydra-like global conspiracy myth, evidently originating in the Catholic Church and weaponized worldwide. According to Graham Reed, the organization's former director of its LGBT rights program, University of Chicago legal scholar Marianne Case notes that these gender theory crusades also target laws meant to benefit reproductive health, women's rights, and the LGBTQ at large. The Trump administration has reportedly tried to enshrine such gender disinformation into law. His January 20th order states that a person's legal sex is determined at conception. But medical experts have pointed out that the embryos do not develop sex characteristics until several weeks after conception. We refer to conception as fertilization, and nobody is male or female at fertilization, said Dr. Eve Feinberg, a physician at Northwestern University, to NBC. Everybody has some combination of X and Y chromosomes, but it's not until 9 to 13 weeks that the differentiation of sex organs begins to develop, which is not always a binary male or female pathway. Even Trump own White House press secretary seemed to contradict the executive order establishing a person's sex at conception. During a briefing, she told reporters that the federal government's modus operandi for gender passports will be based on a person's sex as decided at birth. Generally, birth actually occurs around 9 months after conception. Perhaps Trump's day one EO had some truth to it after all. Gender ideology, it cleared, is internally inconsistent. Okay, that got me a laugh. Ugh. Okay, so we've touched on the things that are happening. I wanted to acknowledge it out loud instead of panicking in my head or letting it loom over me. I mean, it's still sort of Damocles for us all, obviously. What's happening? I mean, it's more than a sort of Damocles at this point. It's like a fucking swinging, like, sword trap. It's like, it's like someone's throwing swords out of a balcony and they're raining down, and just like, oh, better dodge. I know that a lot of people use like streamers, and I mean, especially in the VTuber space, like primarily in the same way like you might use a lot of other entertainment, in the sense of like escapism and like, you know, vibing. And like we always say, we all try to cover our ass and go, no, we'll do chill vibes, I promise. I won't make you all sad all the time. We are not Setsubabam. But, you know, sometimes we do want to talk about serious things. And I don't think that that's abnormal, obviously, but things have just become so much more dire. And there's a lot of people that I know who have their blinders on extra hard, and it's like, knowing the particulars of everything that's happening is not going to help you. It's going to be like when Gojo uses his I was about to say his fucking Keke Genkai. When he uses the infinite void, and he like loads someone's brain with like infinity information, and they have so much information they can't move or do anything, and they just drool. Except you're terrified and you're pissing yourself negatively, and it's just not a good time. And I know that like the concept of, you know, spiraling and you know, what's the word or a phrase, doom scrolling has been a thing for a while. But I think that increasingly, even I certainly am feeling an urge to turn away. Which is why I also value having people around me who also care, that also mention stuff that's going on, stuff that they're worried about. And when we can, we try to be there for people who, even if they're not necessarily overwhelmed with the amount of information of all the bad stuff, maybe there's a particular bad thing that they're really worried about, especially as it personally affects them, maybe in their state. Or, you know, their personal, like, how it's affecting the fabric of their reality, because it's also like the social aspect to it. There's also like the safety and being outside aspect to all this happening. And you know, we're internet critter, we live in your computer, right? You live in ours. I understand that there's a separation here, and you know, we have to also manage our parasociality. But we do have a community, and or try to have a community, and we don't just want we don't want people's interaction with us to just be dopamine, you know, obviously. But I think that probably more often we'll revisit certain things that are happening and maybe just like touch base, you know. Yeah, this wasn't even an hour long. Me talking about all this. It was 45 minutes. That's simple and clean. Uh, well, actually, it was rough and dirty and had no lube, but you know, yeah. Um, that being said, thanks for processing with me. I appreciate you being here. And I hope you're okay.